Hello Internet, and welcome to a new tutorial. Many of us doesn't have a lot of time to produce in the studio, and when they do, the time is so limited it must be used in the most efficient way possible. So today I've put up this tutorial to show you how I start my tracks, what are my tips and tricks for this process, and how I use my time in the most productive way possible that I waste none of it. So let's just jump to the desk and see what this tutorial is all about. Alright, so here we are in front of Bitwig, and this is my main template, basically the project I use to start all of my tracks. We have 150 BPM, this is kind of my sweet spot, and I have a pre-sequenced 16 bars loop, basically kick, bass, and drums. And I like to start with 16 bars because I think it gives me a solid foundation where I can just start putting synthesizers there and experimenting with question and answer. You know, it just makes things more efficient and more straightforward, at least from my point of view. Now, we'll start from top to bottom. So I have my kick and bass in here, and these are actually presets. The kick is from my Twilight kick and bass preset pack. It's the F-sharp one, and the bass is the double bass from my Serum Psyche Volume 2. I know, shameless advertisement, but you know what? At a certain point, you will find a formula like two kick and bass that works really well together for your own taste, and at the same time works really well on stage. And when you find them, you will just stick with them. And I've been testing these two kick and bass in all of my gigs, and yeah, they just work really well together. So go ahead and use them. Up next, we have the drums. And, you know, I'm kind of lazy when it comes to drums. I like to go with a closed hat, open hat, and a snare. And then if I need more, I'll just add. And for the closed hats, I've used the one from Future Phonic. And you can see I've been really lazy. I took the first one. Actually, I thought it sounded good. And I've been using it for over a year now. And for the drummer zone in here, it's a 909 emulation from D16. This is the first one. The second one, they've ruined it. So yeah, I didn't like it. I keep using the first one. And yeah, I have my 909 snare. Now, I actually think the 909 snare sounds the best. This is like, for me, the best snare. It can't go wrong. So I always use it. And for the closed hats, it's just, yeah, 909 closed hats with some processing, I think I've added. Yeah, there's some processing here. And yeah, the pattern that I use is really simple. Pretty straightforward for the open hats with a simple groove variation in here. And for the closed hats and snare, it's, yeah, the simplest groove possible. So everything sounds like this. Up next, we have the drum FXs, and these are basically just like crashes and reverse crashes, and I see them as the simplest way to manipulate the energy of the track, because basically you will use them to either introduce a break, and a break will take some of the energy of the dance floor, and then when you will give back the energy of the dance floor with a drop, you will accentuate that drop with a little crash. So yeah, I have them here like right away ready to use, and as you can see, Future Phonic stuff, and I'm really not paid from Future Phonic or anything. It just happens that I use them and they sound good, so yeah, they're there in my template. Now in this little space I will add all of my synthesizers. We will do this in the second part of the video, and to finish the template walkthrough, we have the sends and returns here. Now I'm old schoolish about it. I like to use sends and returns because I think they make the track more uniform and they make it way easier to mix, because basically all of the synthesizers are sharing 3 delays and 3 reverbs. Of course, if I need something specific for a specific channel, I won't limit myself to these sends and returns. But for general delay and reverbs, I'll use these sends and returns. And yeah, as I mentioned, it gives me a more uniform mix. Now, that said, let's start sequencing. When I start sequencing a track, I like to go as efficient as possible, so I'll leave more time for the creative process where I'll add those details that will make the track stand out and make it what it is. So for that, I've already loaded a 3 synthesizers Q&A MIDI sequence. This is one of the MIDI sequences that you can find in my 3rd Pigments preset pack, and I've already loaded in here 3 Serum presets from my Psyche Volume 2 pack. Now, what I like to do is having a main lead, which is kind of FM-ish, and for that I went with the Looney Bubbles preset in here. It sounds like this. And for the second lead, I like to have something that will add contrast, something out of this world. And for this one, I've went with the preset called Looping Glass. Sounds like this. You know, something that has nothing to do with the first lead. But for the third lead, I like to have something either similar to the first lead or a variation of the first lead. And for that, I actually went with the same lead, Looney Bubbles, but I've changed the macros in here. So we have something that sounds like this. Let's give it a little bit more delay, like so. Perfect. And now everything together will sound like this. Sounds good, but this sequence is far from perfect. It needs some modifications. So the first thing, I think this lead plays way too long in here. So what I'll do, I'll just take this bit in here and I'll drop it for the first lead, for example. Now, just make sure that every lead is playing the same note, and actually all of my presets, I designed them to play the same note. And this is actually like a pro tip. Always make sure when you're designing your presets that they will play correctly the way you want them to sound, at least on the same note. So when you're exchanging MIDI patterns like what I'm doing right now, you won't worry about having a lead playing a lower note or a higher note. You know that everything is playing the same note. And this is so much of a time saver. And by the way, here's another pro tip. Always separate your studio sessions into sound design or sequencing, because if you're sound designing while sequencing, you might end up losing a lot of time trying to sound design the perfect sound that will work with the rest of the track. So instead, try this. Sound design sessions where you will create your sonic identity and your own presets, and sequencing sessions where you will take those sounds, play around with them, see what works best, and create your question and answer games with them. Now, that's it. Let's get back to the tutorial. So in here, I've exchanged MIDI between the third lead and the first lead, and maybe in here I can take this phrase in here is a little bit too long, so I'll take this bit and I'll add it for the second lead. And because the sequence sounds a bit flat and kind of boring, what I like to do in here is start manipulating its energy using those crashes and reverse crashes. So we will start with a big crash like so. Okay, that's a bit loud, let's take it down. And what I like to do, every 8 bars, I like to keep kind of like a marker of time, if that makes sense. And what I'll do is, I'll add at the end of the 8th bar a little crash in here. It's going to be in the background and it'll sound like this. You know, it's just here to remind us of the time, kind of like a brain game, if that makes sense. And at the end of these 16 bars, what I like to do is take this reverse crash, put it in here, right before the last beat, and take the kick and bass from here, just leave a blank space, and of course the drums, just like so. And now we'll have this. And what I like to do to make things a bit more interesting, I will take this kick in here, I'll copy it and make some sort of a little kick roll. So now we have this. Sounds way better, right? Now let's hear the whole sequence with the modifications that I've added. We'll get this. Now the next step is to duplicate this pattern the way it is, so we'll get 32 bars basically, just like so. And the reason why I went with 32 bars is because a main drop of a track is somewhere in between 32 to 64 bars. So by having from the beginning a solid 32 bars, I know that the track will evolve to them from the intro, and from there it'll evolve to the outro basically. Of course, there will be some breaks, another drop, etc. But the main idea is here, and I know that everything will evolve around this main idea. Now, we've duplicated the first 16 bars, but of course we won't keep things the way they are. What we will do actually is, first of all, modify this sequence a little bit. We need to keep it the way it is, but we will add some modifications to it so it'll be more interesting. And the easiest way to do so is by modifying this MIDI pattern. So for example, what I'll do, I'll take this bit from the first lead and I'll add it to the third lead. This bit for the second lead, I'll add half of it to the first lead, for example. Let's keep the rest the way it is. And in here, this bit is way too long, so maybe I'll take this bit from the first lead and add it to the third lead. And now we basically have this. I don't like how we've ended this phrase, so I'll take this bit from the second lead and I'll add it to the first lead like so. So now we have this. Sounds perfect, but the sequence doesn't end quite right, you know, like it ends just like the 16th bar in here, and I don't like that, you know, it's repeating way too much and it doesn't really make sense. I want to let the track breathe a little bit, so I'll create some sort of a really mini break, you know, we can't even call it a break. But in a nutshell, what I'll do, I'll leave one bar empty in here, I'll take all of the drums, the kick and bass too, I'll just delete them like so, and I'll leave the third lead in here to play all by itself. So now we have this. And with this is the end of this tutorial. I really hope you've liked it. I really hope you've learned something new. If you want to support the channel, check out my preset banks on my Gumroad, or you can consider becoming a Patreon, or just leave a like, comment and subscribe. Things like that helps the channel a lot. But for now, I'll see you in the next one.